Hey everyone, in this video we will talk about JavaScript objects and their serialization into JSON text using the JSON.stringify function. I wanted to make this video because some developers treat JavaScript objects and JSON text as the same thing because they look exactly like same, but JavaScript objects are much more than JSON text. They are first class variables and they're part of primitive features available in the JavaScript language. They have always been around forever. So JavaScript objects can contain values of any types, from primitive types like string, number, boolean, null, undefined array, nested objects, to derived types like map, set, date, array. Even they can even contain functions and instances of custom classes that we define. So we will take a look at that. But JSON data on the other hand is just plain text format, which helps us store and transport data. And the data types that are supported by JSON text is string, number, boolean, null, array, and nested objects. Okay, we can convert JavaScript objects into JSON text using JSON.stringify function, and it's also called serialization. And once we have a JSON text, if we have a JSON text, we can also convert that JSON text into JavaScript objects using JSON.parse function, which is also called deserialization. So let's take an example. We have a JavaScript object here called user, and it has all these basic properties of different types, and we have this function getUser function which will return this JavaScript object. We will get this user object, and then we will call the stringify function, which is just using JavaScript JSON.stringify. We'll talk about these two parameters in just a second. So let's just try to first stringify this JavaScript object into JSON text. So here we can see we have all the properties: ID, email, active, referred by, but there is this verified property with the value undefined, which is not present here in the JSON text. So that means, since undefined is not supported, is not a supported type by JSON, that's why it is completely ignored. Okay. So now, to make things more interesting, we know that our JavaScript objects can hold different types other than these basic types. So let's add more values having different types. So I'll add some more properties which are having different types. So first we have two properties, two values, one with map and set. I will also take an example of date. Okay, let's also take a custom class maybe, so that we can add instances of custom we can add in these instances into this JavaScript object. And also let me add a function. Okay, so I will add all these properties. So closing balance, addresses, accounts, say hello function. So all these properties are also added to this JavaScript object. Now what will happen when we try to convert all these properties, this object, using JavaScript JSON.stringify? So what will happen to these properties? That's something that I want to take a look at. So let's go ahead. Here we see closing balance is it was a map, but it is now converted to an empty object. This addresses property was an array of instances of our custom class address, but now it is converted to an array of objects and this object has all the properties of this class, of this address class: house, street, city, zip code, country. And the properties are just how we have defined them here. The name of the keys is just how we have defined here. So this array is array of instances of custom class is now converted to array of objects. Accounts is converted to an empty object. Okay, accounts was a set having the value of set, but now it is converted to an empty object. And this say hello, which was a function, is not present here, just like undefined. So looks like we have default behavior for custom classes, and the default behavior is to just export all the properties of this class. And for date, wait, we forgot to add date, so let me add date here as well. Okay, so for date we are getting a string value of that date. So we have this date, we have the string value including the time component as well. So looks like this JSON.stringify function is using some mechanism to convert each of these types, each of these different types. We have map, we have set, so they are converted into empty objects, but our classes, instances of our classes, they are converted into objects with all the properties exported into that object. Then we have date is converted to a string, and functions are completely ignored. So what do we understand by this? How do we this is very mysterious behavior where some types are handled differently than others, and map and set, their values are completely ignored, which makes sense because map and set, how do we represent them in JSON text? So that's kind of ambiguous. So should we just accept this behavior, or what if we want to, there are questions like, what if we want to customize the behavior? What if we don't want this class exported, just all the properties exported into object just like this? So what if we want to customize this behavior? Okay, so let's understand the working of JSON.stringify and see if we can control this somehow as per our requirement. So first thing that we can do to understand is this JSON.stringify function, when converting each property or each object recursively, tries to check for a function called toJSON function. So let's take a look at this date value, right? This date has toJSON function attached to it. So this toJSON function is used by JSON.stringify method to enable the transformation of the object's data into JSON serialization. Okay, so that explains how date is converted into JSON text, but we don't have any toJSON function on our address class. So let's try to add one and see what happens if we add one toJSON function. And in this function I'm just going to just return an address. So you can just say, instead of returning all the properties, I'm just going to return these in a combined way by joining using comma and a space. So with this we can kind of control how this address instances of this address class are exported into JSON objects. Okay, so let's try to see what happens now. So as you can see, addresses, instead of having all the properties, now it has just one property in how we have defined it. So it has all these values in order combined with comma and space. Okay. Similarly, we can also control how map and set, these are serialized into JSON text by adding this to JSON function. So I'm going to add to JSON function. So map should be converted, let's say, to an object using the values of this map. We will convert it into object entries. Similarly, let's also see if we can convert set. So we will say values of this set exported into an array. So if we try to do this, earlier we were getting empty values, empty objects for these map and set, but this time you can see we have for map we have an object, for set we have an array, right? And the values are similar to what we have here. So this is one standard way to deal with how to export map and set, but adding these functions to each of the map variable or set variable is going to be cumbersome. There must be some other way, and this JSON.stringify function actually provides one standard way to deal with this, instead of having to define these functions on each variable we have. So remember we talked about these two params. So JSON.stringify function takes 3 arguments. First is the object that we are trying to serialize into JSON data. Second is a callback function, and this callback function is what will allow us to tell how to serialize a value into JSON text. And this third value is the indentation when we convert into text. So it has a nice indentation between these properties, so we can control how many spaces to use in the indentation. Okay, so talking about replacer function, which is the second argument to JSON.stringify. So we have two. It takes 2 arguments, 2 parameters, and one is key and the second one is value. So when we convert let's say this user object to so we want to convert all map values into object. So we will say object dot from entries, and if the value is an instance of set, then we will return all the values in an array. Otherwise we will just return the value. And if there is two JSON property attached to this value, then that will be used to convert that object into JSON text. Okay, so with classes it's fine, we just have to add it once. We just have to define a toJSON function if we want to control how the instances of these classes are exported into JSON text. But we don't want to define how to convert each map and each set variable, so we can define it in a single function called the replacer function. So let's see how this works. So as you can see, it is working as expected. even though we don't have a toJSON function on these variables, we are still getting object and array instead of map and set. Okay, so I wanted to show one more example where we want to send this user data as an HTTP API response without losing all this information which are stored in set and map. Classes are automatically handled, but we have a custom behavior on class as well. Date is handled by default, and that's good enough for us. So I have this API server where we have just one endpoint, and we are sending the user data. First we are getting the user data, then we are using stringify, and then we are parsing it back so that we can send it as a JSON response. So here we can see that if I make a request to this request, then we should get all this information. So I'll just go ahead and copy this, and let me start the server. So we have our server running. If I make a request, you can see that I am getting all the information that is stored in map as well as set, and we have the custom serialization function working on our address classes. Okay, so this is it for serialization. Maybe we should also take a look at deserialization in the next video. Let me know if you want me to make a video on that. But yeah, deserialization will basically be converting all of this data into a JavaScript object back and into the desired data types that we want. So if we want this to have a map type, then we should handle that, and if we want to have this as a set type, then we should handle that.